All right, comrades. So here we go. We're gonna hit this. So, Night of Revelation. It's after this book. So, but I'm just talk about it now while we're here. I was gonna read all of Frank Herbert's Dune books again, and then I remember a lot about when I read them like years ago because they're so good and all this stuff. But to be completely honest, the last two books that he wrote, I was trying to like recall like what occurred in them while I was reading the rest of these because I was like, I really don't remember what happened after God Emperor Doom. I remember everything up to this point, and I'm like, did I actually read these books? And then I started reading Heretics of Doom, and then I remembered that I hate those books because they're not good. And then I had a conversation with my wife about it. I got like halfway through Heretics of Doom, and I was like, I don't want to read this anymore. Reading this once was enough, and I don't want to talk about it either because I don't enjoy it like at all. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit why, and then we'll get into God Emperor Doom. But in reality, if you are listening to this stuff and you're curious about Dune, or you want to read it, or you hear everyone talking about how great it is, just read the first 3 books. After that, if you really want to find out what happens with Leto II, you can read God Emperor Dune. After that point, there's no reason to read any further. And yeah, it kind of leaves on like a cliffhanger ending sort of, but at the same time, it's like, it's not enough of like, you don't get like a good result. Like whatever you thought in your head about like stuff that he brings up here about like what the Golden Path and what they're protecting humanity from, either just like Wikipedia the rest of the book stories, because it's not even like there's 4 books, and I never knew this, and because I looked it up when I was like thinking about this, because I was like, I don't remember these books like ending either. So that's why I was like, I don't remember there being like a firm ending, but there is. But it's like the notes that Frank Herbert left behind. His son got together with some other writer and like finished off the last 2 books, which are like Hunters of Dune and something else. Anyway, but to me, it's like what transpires after God Emperor Doom is Dune goes from being like a hard science fiction, as in like very philosophical, very like focused on the characters and like the world, and just like bringing you into this thing and showing you different takes on things, and like really running with this like great story. And even in like God Emperor Doom, it starts to kind of move away a little bit from this concept. It still pretty holds on to like what is humanity, what is the purpose of things, what is fate, how do we control things, like what do we got to account for and stuff. But I feel like it starts to lose its way a little bit, and I'll talk about that a little bit as I go through it. But then when you go to Heretics of Doom, it is like when you're watching Star Trek for like decades, and then all of a sudden you're watching like the movies that came out. I can't remember who did them, but with Chris Pine. And you're just like, what the fuck is this? I get that. Okay, that guy's called Kirk, and they fly in a ship called the Enterprise, and it like they're wearing like uniforms that are kind of close, and there's like Klingons that exist. But like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is not Star Trek. Like, this is like some science fiction soap opera thingy, like Star Wars, that is like in the Star Trek world. And it's like really frustrating to watch, because you're like, this is not good, and this is not what I'm here for. And that's how I feel about Heretics of Doom and Chapter House of Doom, or Chapter Houses of Dune. I never read the other ones, so I can't even speak. But it's like it goes from like this very like serious philosophical, a lot of like thinking about stuff, like really focused on like this family and like how like little things can change the course of like billions of lives, and how, you know, trusting in a savior or messiah and the faults of a messiah and like all this stuff, to being like, and again, this starts to happen in God Emperor Doom, but it's not enough to really ruin the book, to be completely honest. Like, again, if I feel like, okay, I've now read God Emperor Doom 2 or 3 times. I don't ever need to read it again, but those first 3 books I'd read again. Like, they're fantastic. So, but these other books, like, I'm like, man, I couldn't even get through, I think not even halfway. I probably got like to page 200 or something, and I was just like, I'm so bored. This is so boring, and I'm over it. And it's like, if you're just gonna write Frank Herbert, like if you're just gonna write like a book that takes place like thousands of years in the future that has nothing to do with like anything else that's going on, just like continue the story. Like I get the story, right? We all know what's gonna happen. And it's better just to make up my mind, or just leave it like, I set forth on the golden path, and now humanity has to decide if they're going to stick to it. The end. I'd much rather have that, like an anime cliffhanger ending, where it's just like, it's up to my imagination what's going to happen next. I'm a little disappointed that I don't get an answer, than like the answer you got, which was the answer you've probably got if you like read any of these books with any amount of like attention. But it's also poorly written, and just like you could tell he was not going like full steam ahead like he had in like the 60s and 70s. But to each their own. So that's my take. So after this, we're going to move on to probably some light novels. Maybe I downloaded like a whole cache of Michael Crichton books, which I really liked. And I saw a couple I'd never read before, so I might just read some of those. Those are going to be much more like slimmed down reviews. or story reviews, because light novels tend to not be that much going on in because they're like, it's like one light novel is like a part. It's like a part of like a huge. It's like a volume, right? It's a part of like a huge cachet. So if I'm reading like one or two, then usually those books aren't even that long. It's like novellas. And then Michael Crichton books, there's not like a whole lot going on. They're like more action thrillers or mystery books. So there's not. It's not like a science fiction or fantasy book where we have to like delve into like the philosophy that's going on. It's just like, there's a mystery. Let's solve the mystery. But then I got anime coming up as well. I'm watching what is it? The New World. Something in the New World. Anyway, but all that's going to come up in the next couple of months as we go along. So God Emperor Doom opens up, and we get a historian talking excitedly about how they discovered a Talaxian orb that was hidden, and that it's ancient, and that inside there were the diaries of Leto II. Leto II being the Leto who put all the sand trout on him, and is the son of Paul Atreides from the previous book. And they're talking about like all the lives of him and all the things he did and how he ruled as an emperor. And then they read a passage, and it's from Leto. He says, he holds the strings of fate, experiences all things, but they are all in the past at the same time. And that's like the introductory chapter. So then chapter 2 starts off, and we have these 3 Fremen, and they're running away from D-wolves. They're being hunted. And we find out that it's been 3,000 years since the last book, which is kind of ridiculous, which is already kind of like a red flag. For me, it's like, what? And so the first guy goes down from the chase, and then we find out that one of the runners, the second runner who's still up, he's a descendant of Stilgar from Siege Tabor, and that the whole thing with Siege Tabor is like gone into myth and all this stuff, and then he gets eaten up by D-wolves, so he's able to put up a little bit of a fight. And the last one's this chick, and she's making a run for the Idaho River, like the Duncan Idaho River, right? And that as she's thinking and running, we see that she stole plans. They went to go steal some plans so they can make an attack on Leto and like his fortress, but they also got some of the writings of Leto as well, and that what they really want is his spice reserves and to stop his rule. And so she makes it to the river, and she gets in there and gets away. And the wolves have like a command or compulsion not to cross over the river or something that they know about. And so they go back to just like finish eating up her buddies. And we find out there wasn't just 3 of them, there were like 10 of them. And so she's the last one left alive. And so while she's swimming away, she starts thinking about revenge. And so we head over to chapter 3. We finally get Leto. And he's recalling his genealogy. He goes through like, oh, I'm the son of Leto, who's the son of whatever, and then Paul and Shawnee, and this side. And then he discusses like kind of going through like the 3,000 years. He talks about the journals that he's keeping. He makes them with this Talaxian device because he's like more worm than man at this point. And he talks a lot about Talaxian devices. And I don't remember reading that much about Talax or the Talaxu before. So I was trying to remember if they even came up previously, because we had the... Oh, no, sorry. He's talking a lot about the Ixian. The Ixian devices and all this stuff. And because the Talax are the ones with the face dancers, and the Ixian are like, they're making like secret machines and doing things that like are against the Batlaharian Jihad, essentially, but they're like useful to like Leto, so he kind of allows it, right? And so they have this like typing device, and they have this like node chamber where people can't see into it, and it's like supposed to be found later and all this stuff. And at this point, 3,000 years later, he has complete control of Spice Melange. There are no more worms. Like, so all the spice that exists, that's the spice that exists. And meanwhile, he's transforming into a worm, and he has this whole thing, which keeps coming up throughout the book, about how like he will exist for like a set period of time, and then he will evolve into other things, and that he will exist in like all worms and all this kind of crazy stuff, which is very like, it's very like the foresight, because the whole time he's speaking, it's like Leto always knows exactly what's going to happen. He's seen the future. He's like set up plans for it, and he likes to like not give himself like a complete understanding, but he makes sure that anytime anything comes up that like triggers like not the golden path, that he cuts it off. He kills somebody or moves something or does something, and that the whole universe is. So going back, so the whole universe is almost out of Spice Melange. The Bene Gesserit, Space and Guild houses, the Talaxu, the Ixians, all that. They've been just like leeching off essentially the vast resources, the reservation that Leto has. And so part of this is like he's maintained peace for like almost the 3,000 years. Like no one's been fighting. The houses haven't been fighting. The houses are kind of like going away, all this stuff. And then he starts talking about Siona. Siona's the girl from the second chapter who was like escaping, and she's an Atreides. She's the one who escaped with the writings, and it's clearly he mentions like preparing her. And then we start chapter 4 with Siona kind of recalling, or no, but somebody listening to a recorded conversation from Siona and her father, and that her father Manoa, he's concerned because like there's the worm, and when the worm starts taking precedence, it'll like kill anything around it. And so he keeps paying attention to that, and that she needs to be careful, and that they have like this conversation. We find out that her father Maneo is like the aide de camp or like the vizier or whatever of Leto's like empire. And then he's like over the 3,000 years he's kept making like Duncan Idahos, like the Golas, and then making them like become Duncan Idaho through like the Gola process and all that stuff. And this is one of those areas where I'm like, okay. Like him becoming a worm, but it's like all these Duncan Idahos and he keeps doing it, and it's like there's like a point to it at the end. Like you find out that there's a very specific reason why he did this, but at the same time it's kind of like eye rolling. And also that you start to get the threads that Siona has been bred and developed to be like a very specific person at this time, with like to match up with like a Duncan Idaho and like kind of keep the golden path going. And then and we get all this from Siona and Manoa talking, and like the worm's killed like 9 Duncan Idahos, but he's never killed you. And then Manoa's like, yeah, I know when to leave, because when the worm comes, you got to go. We then go to Leto. He's in the catacombs under his palace, and he's waiting for like the most recent like Duncan Idaho. And he talks about how like it's always like around like 60 years or 100, somewhere between 600 years they rebel, and that he knows this guy's bringing a las gun down to shoot him, and he thinks about Siona, and he wanted to make this Duncan Idaho with Siona, but I guess that's not going to work out. He thinks about the Talaxu and how they're like, if they're doing something to Duncan, but he would know, these Duncan Idaho Golas. And finally Duncan arrives. They talk. Duncan gives a report. There's like a cult that to like a combination of Aaliyah and Jessica as like a god on like Kitty Prime, which is like the old Harkonnen world, and that it was like this cult was set up by the Bene Gesserits to cover so that they could like find the huge spice reserves in under Kitty Prime. That the Harkonnens like left there and no one ever touched. And Leto zones out for a while, and Duncan continues. He's just like, oh, yada yada, this guy's going to attack me at some point. And then he comes to right when Duncan's like pointing a laser gun at him. And so Leto moves and crushes Duncan. He gets his foot shot, which is like a flipper at this point, because all he has left is like really his face, and then his brain is like over the whole worm at this juncture. So the face is almost like unnecessary. He's almost like worm at this point. And he has to be carried around by this like suspensor litter kind of thing. And that each year he gets closer and closer to full metamorphosis, which will be around like year 4,000. But he still has hands. They're kind of like fucked up and like long and stuff, but he can still use them. And then, okay, so then we get introduced to Nayla. Nayla is a servant of Leto, who we ordered to serve Siona unquestionably and do everything she says, always, forever. And so she's sending a report to Leto about... about sending the report she stole. Oh, okay, yeah. So she lets Leto know that Siona, that kind of the journals of Leto that she stole, she gave some to the Bene Gesserit, some to the Talaxos, some to the Ixans, so everyone could like have access to them and translate them and whatnot. And at some point, Siona asks Nayla what drives her, and Nayla says that her search for God. And Siona's like, I love this, not understanding that Nayla's God is Leto, because she's like undercover at this juncture. So then a new Duncan Idaho shows up. He recalls his conditioning, how he had to kill a Paul lookalike so that he could like unlock his like Duncan Idaho persona, like in the second book. And then so the Talaxos bring him to Arrakis. He meets with 2 of Leto's servants. One's masked, which is we find out later is Nayla. And then they want to make sure that Talaxos aren't doing any funny business, and then they want to mate with him before he goes to see Leto. And then Duncan's like thinking about the Atreides and how he's loyal to a fault and whatnot. Siona later on is at an initiation ceremony for her like rebellion, and there's this Topper guy, and he brings the ambassador from Ix, and so the ambassador from Ix is the guy who gave the las gun to Duncan to attack, and so he's like, you got to go. And then he recognizes that Siona's the daughter of Manoa, and Siona calls him out for being like not fully honest with them. They talk about the new Duncan Idaho is dead, and he reveals to them that the cart that gets Leto around needs more extensions. She gives them the copies of Leto's diary, just like she did the Bene Gesserits. And the Spacing Guild, too. And then we find out that Topper is an agent for Leto, and that he lied to the ambassador as part of all this business. And then Siona like gets mad and kicks them both out, but lets them go and live. And that's the last we hear about either of those guys. And she's excited for this new ambassador, because hopefully that new ambassador is more easy to work with. So then we go over to Ix, and the government's talking to the new ambassador, the Nori, Nori, who's, they keep calling her a queen, and it never gets explained, but okay. She's recalling all of Leto's histories and the connection there and stuff. And then we switch over to Manoa and Leto talking about man as death, about the Golden Path, about Siona, about Duncan Idaho, about the breedings and all that. And then Leto looks over and recognizes that Manoa's about to pass because he refuses to take any of the spice in him so that he can continue his life. We then switch over to a Bene Gesserit report. And this again is like kind of like, we're not getting characters. We're just getting these like reports from like anonymous like people who like never show up again or like are not really recognized. And it's just, it kind of drags because it's like, it's all kind of like trying to get you caught up in like 3,000 years. And it's like, how about you just write a book that's not like 3,000 years in the future, maybe? I don't know. You know, or just like, let us figure it out in like a better way. Like, it just feels like the writing is not as good. Like, I feel like the writing in Dune like helped you explore the world so much better. Like, maybe we should just not be getting information from Leto at all. Maybe it should all begin from like the New Duncan, Idaho or something. And I don't like the Duncan, Idaho thing, but again, it's one of those things where it's like I'm so excited like recalling the first 3 books, and I get to hear, and it's like some of it's interesting, but some of it I'm just kind of like, all right, let's just get through this. And the future books are even worse. All right, so the Bene Gesserit, one of them went over and like, you know, or they have like a recounting of like all their debts and everything that's going on. So then we just get like a whole chapter. It's like the Bene Gesserit report of like the last 3,000 years. I lost my name, Kitty Prime. They're disappointed about the breeding program. Ixo's got a new ambassador, which like multiple people have talked about now. There's something to do with like Leto's breeding program. The noble houses are completely irrelevant. The Ixian machines, they're trying to create like, or no, the Talaxi are creating these things. They're trying to create like fake spice melange with their like vats, their Ataloan like vats or whatever. And then they have a bunch of like Fremen conspirators on Arrakis, but they want more money. Leto's excited. He's waiting for Nella. And she muses how like out of all like the 3,000 years of life, she's the best servant, most faithful. Anything you ask her to do, she'll do. And she's part of like the fish speakers, which is like this form of like warrior priesthood. So there's no male warriors anymore, and there's like conversations about that, about how men like rape and all this stuff, and that he's essentially establishing this priesthood of like these warrior women to be the army, but also to replace kind of the Bene Gesserits, and the Bene Gesserits hate it. And then Nella reports that Siona, they talk about she would be a great fish speaker leader, and then Leto like does like a wink and a nod, but she doesn't notice because she's too enthralled with like speaking to her like her literal god. And that Nayla is ordered to protect Siona no matter what. And Nayla just keeps being like, got it, I will do that, my lord. Or like, yes, my god. And Leto's like, whenever she says that, she doesn't understand, but she's going to do it no matter what. So Leto and Duncan finally meet. Leto starts off with the room super dark so Duncan can become accustomed, so he doesn't just see like worm Leto. They talk about the Talaxu, their relationship, the other Duncans. Duncan finally agrees to lead like the men / the fish speakers, who are all women. And then he wants to talk to Leto 1 and Paul, so Leto 2, who's like shares all these like entities within him, like lets him do that. And Leto 2 is crying in joy. And then Manoa has to come and like take Duncan out of there so he doesn't embarrass himself anymore. Manoa explains to Duncan. He answers like a lot of his questions, a lot about Duncan stuff that's happened in the past. What happened to the previous Duncans? Everyone just ignores that. Manoa is actually a descendant of Duncan, Idaho. Also, he's an Atreides. That the all-woman army, the men get gay and get violent. Yep. Especially when there's peace, and there's been peace for like thousands of years. And then the 3 of them, Leto, Manoa, and Duncan later on are like walking. Leto's being like really wistful. Duncan's being cautious. Manoa reflects on Sonoa and the rebellion and how he used to be a rebel and all this stuff. And he thinks about how Leto finally was able to win him over. And he mentions to Duncan that he was mostly curious, so he came to talk to the God Emperor, and that kind of one thing led to another. Then they get lost in their thoughts and proceed forward. And then we switch over to the Bene Gesserits. There's like a big festival going on. There's like a festival every 10 years where like the various powers come and like bake spice from his god emperor, Leto II. And so their contingent is here, and they find out that they put in a petition and that their line order was like higher up, and then it got moved to the very end, which means they're not going to get spice, and they're furious about it. They then get a messenger about how the Talaxi have many face dancers and how they've replaced a lot of their staff, and that they're going to try to kill Leto today. The Reverend Mother, who's secretly a Mentat, because Mentats aren't allowed anymore, so it's like a very secret, but of course Leto knows. And she knows it's going to fail because she does the calculations. They talk about Siona and all that jazz, and then they send a report to Leto about the face dancers and everything that's going on. Leto and Manoa are continuing towards the festival with Duncan and the fish speakers. They talk about the future. Leto talks about someday he'll be Shai-Hulud, the worm god, and that Dune will return, that many will have to die. And then he talks about his secret cache is spice, and that's it. There's no more spice after this until he transforms. They talk about Siona, about mating with Duncan, with Siona. And then Manoa keeps bringing up that he wants Siona to be brought in soon, and Leto's like, yeah, I agree. And then at some point, Leto almost lets like the worm take over, and then Manoa kind of talks to him about it, and he's like, "You've done a good job avoiding this." And Manoa kind of is like, "Oh, I'm dead now. There's nowhere to run." But Leto's able to calm themselves, and they continue onward. And then there's a Bene Gesserit. We get like a letter from Bene Gesserit who like went and spoke with Leto and got like some secrets, and then her secrets were like put somewhere, and then they were like found again. Like this whole thing, it was found like thousands of years later. And she asked about him being an abomination. He's very coy about it, and he references democracy and said it was terrible. But that's kind of like how the system, like there's a lot of ancestors in him that believe in this democratic state, and so they kind of work as like a democracy inside his head. So he's no longer just Leto. He's like this council of like elders or whatever, and that they were able to completely suppress like the malignant forces, so they can all like exist together and not be like an actual abomination. And then he talks about how he's a god, not an emperor, or he's a god, not a tyrant or a leader, and that he's preparing the people for the way. He's here to educate them. Like that's what God does. God educates and leads, or not doesn't lead. He educates and like points in the right direction, and that he's writing all these journals so that people will understand like what's he doing and why. And then we find out that like later on, the Bene Gesserit lady, like 100 decades later or whatever, she died because when she went to become like a Reverend Mother to do like the melange poisoning or whatever, and that killed her. And that's something that Leto told her when they were having this conversation. He's like, "You'll never be a Reverend Mother." So anyway, moving forward, there's these Fremen who come out to like beg. They keep calling museum Fremen because the Fremen are like non-existent anymore. But he keeps like pockets of like the descendants of the Fremen in like these like desert locations where they don't have like all the good goodies that like everyone else has. So the Fremen come up, they say they want a petition, and Leto's like, charge them, because they're actually face dancers. So they all turn into Duncan Idahos, and so Leto joins in the battle and rolls around and kills a bunch of them. The warriors, like the fish speakers, kill them all. All of them are dead. Duncan's safe because he took his clothes off, so they knew it was him and not like the face dancers. But they are the fish speakers, so they lost 30 of them. Leto thinks it's hilarious, and he talks about the intellects have gotten weak, that these face dancers aren't as good as they used to be. And then Duncan's like, maybe we should use shields, and Manoa's like, what's a shield? And then Duncan explains, and Leto's like, no, they're banned because they could cause a fusion reaction, and that's the last thing we need. And we don't need to like nuke this whole fucking place or whatever. And then Manoa feels really bad because he's the one who gave a pass to the museum Fremen, but then the face dancers killed them and took the pass and came along, and then Leto's like, I don't want anyone to know anything of this happened, so hide it. Just bury these bodies, get rid of them, don't bring it up. I don't want the Tlaxu to worry about what's going on. I want them to be like pretty, like, oh, I guess we fooled them. Duncan Leto then talk about how Leto could die, and he talks about how these attacks against him are getting more desperate. And then at that point, they get the message from the Bene Gesserit, which of course is too late. But he's like, you know what? I'll see them first. Or he's like, tell them I will see them last, but the first shall be the last, which is from the Orange Catholic Bible or like the regular King James Bible. Let's see. Okay, then we learn about this, like, again, it's like so much like bullshit that has nothing to do with anything. We learn about this special word, I can't remember what it is, that the fish dancer or the fish speakers use, and it means like all this like crazy bullshit, and that the only person who knows about it is Manoa, and then they teach it to Duncan, and yada yada yada. We learn more about the festival. They talk about Own, which is like the festival city here, and everything involved with it. And then Duncan realizes that Leto constantly is ingesting himself with their own spice that he creates, like his own poop, spice melange. We learn about the town. It's like it's a ring city, which is like, like in Dark Souls. But there's also a city below Own for Leto and his crew to like hang out in. And then Duncan sees like a lot of fish speakers speaking like this word that means like all these different special things. And so then later on, Leto's meeting with the new Ixian ambassador, and she was she was developed and sent specifically to charm Leto, and he realizes this and he loves it. And this is Nori. They talk about how Leto killed her ancestor, and she doesn't mind, and that the Ixians have a secret colony, and Leto's like, yeah, I knows about that, and like whatever, I don't care. And she mentions that she tried to get them not to do it, and then he recalls how he discovered their homeworld, despite them trying to hide it. Like they really can't keep any secrets from him. And he talks about baiting and tricking and stuff. She starts to get a little nervous, but Leto's like really into her. But at the same time, he's like, he tells her like, you don't have parents, you don't have a past. She explains like she had all these teachers. She's like, doesn't really have a birthday, and she's training all these things. Like she's training like Bene Gesserit stuff and all this other things. And so at one point, she searched for records of herself in her past and couldn't find anything. And Leto thinks she was born in a machine, and that Malti, this previous Ixian ambassador, it's like somehow they're related. Like she calls him Wee calls Malty her uncle, but he thinks it's like a father relationship, or there's something else sketchy going on. And then later he's like, yeah, I know that everyone's like allying against me, and it doesn't matter, I don't care. And then he tells her to let the Ixians know that if anything happens to her, he will not accept another ambassador, and they'll be fucked out of Melange, so they can let just to make sure they understand. And then Leto starts thinking about feeling human things, about physical sensations, and he orders her to leave because he realizes that if he was still human, that they would have been lovers, and that this is exactly what the Ixians had in mind when they like developed this thing. And that he would destroy the Ixians now for tormenting him, but that he needs their machines because they're very important for like the Golden Path. And then a little bit later, we get Leto and Duncan. They're getting ready to pass judgment on a Talaxu ambassador who was involved with like this sexual attack, or the sexual attack. Sorry, this attack on him, and the guy's like ready to fight against it. But then Leto like throws him a curveball and is like, "You've been saying I have like these strange sexual proclivities, so your Talaxu are going to be a thought spies for 10 years." And the guy doesn't know. And he's like, "What? Oh fuck! I got outplayed." And then he sends him out to be flogged. But Nella is the one who goes to flog him. And at some point, Leto's like, she's going to murder this motherfucker. I don't need that to happen. So he sends like somebody else to like stop her from like massacring her because there's going to be a bunch of rebellions. And Leto and Duncan start talking about how he's completely against militarism and that he's all here to like teach people and make sure that they, make the right choices so that they can stay on the Golden Path. And that, and then when the Bene Gesserits come for their like meeting, there's two Reverend Mothers. One of them's like there to distract him, and the other one's gonna like hit him with a concentrated spice and to like kill him because that's like what they used to kill like the worms before to get like the special spice so they can turn the Reverend Mothers. And he's like calls them out, and then they talk about the Ix and their machine, and then the desire that the Ixians have to build like an oracle so they can see the future too. Leto's like completely fucking concerned about this. He agrees to continue their spice trade as is for the next 10 years, even though they tried to kill him because they did send them a warning and stuff. And they're like, all right, that sounds good, and we're fine. And then Duncan comes in to report that there's lots of attacks and lots of rebellion because of the flogging, and that people have gone and like killed his D-wolves. And then Leto's like, go get me some human wolves. And then he has a conversation with Bene Gesserits about predators. We get this whole chapter about how he wants to bang Wee, who's the Ixian ambassador, and how great she is. Duncan also wants to bang her, and she finds Duncan sexually attractive, which will become important shortly. Later on, Duncan's just hanging out with Siona for some reason. They're heading into town. There's an old siege. This is where the outcast lives. And she introduces Duncan to like this guy who is like the son of the previous Duncan Idaho and a woman who looks exactly like Jessica, who the previous Duncan Idaho was shacking up with. They leave. Duncan's like, why the fuck do you do this? And then Siona explains that they're all trapped. Like no one can leave this planet without his permission, and that there's peace because of the God King, but like they have no freedom. And that they're gonna put Siona and Duncan in the same room to share a chamber because Leto wants him to mate. And then Duncan's like, I'm no stud, and they don't have sex. And then don't worry, they have sex later. But she makes a big deal about not wanting to have sex with Duncan Idaho, and then it just happens later anyway. So it's like this book. Anyway, later on, Leto takes Duncan down to like a secret place, and it's like this hidden place. And they talk about previous Duncans. And they talk about the ceremony, this big old ceremony. There's like all the fish speakers there, and it's like every 10 years they have this thing, and then he initiates more fish speakers, and then fish speakers can retire to become like Reverend Mothers or something. I don't know. Like they have kids and stuff, and they like trade out the old and the new. They become mothers, priestesses. There's this grand ceremony. They pass around the spice wafer. And that Duncan realizes at this point that these fish speakers would do anything for Leto. Like they would like kill their own children and kill themselves if that's what he asked them to do. We get another discussion about women versus men in the army. Women are more communal, less rapey. Men are too ambitious. Women want to serve, which is based, but also true. And then as Duncan and Leto leave, all the women try to touch God, essentially, to get a blessing. Hui's brought in later because we find out that the whole Ixian embassy was replaced with face dancers, so she was not safe, so they kind of rescued her, brought her over here because they were going to kill her next and replace her. They talk about how they're both in love with each other, like spiritually, if not physically, and that he wants her to be her queen. but that he can't give her physical relief. She says, that's okay, I'll figure it out, which she does. And they talk about eventually he's going to turn into a worm, and the all worms, and about the sand trout, and how the necessity. He talks about Ganima and her death, how she pronounced him God upon his death, so that there was like no question about his godhood. They're going to return to the Citadel, and when they get back there, he's going to tell her about the Golden Path. Until then, the fish beagles will protect her with their life. And then we got to deal with Duncan again. So Duncan comes in, argues about the religion, about Duncan's place in this whole situation, why he keeps getting resurrected, a lot of very valid things about why do you keep resurrecting Duncan's trying to kill you, you dumb shit. He seems somewhat placated, and then they discuss and then because they pass in the hallway, and as she was passing, she mentioned to Duncan that she's no longer an Ixian, that she belongs to Leto now. And then Leto's like, you better fucking stay away from her because you're going to fuck her if you get close, which is true. And then lastly, in this whole like barrage of like back and forth during this like festival period, Mineo comes in. He's got disturbing news from the Talaxu. And that news from the Talaxu, from the torturing of the Talaxu face dancers that were attacking him, is that the Ix have created a device. Molly's created a device. And again, he's the uncle of Wee and the old ambassador. And that he went into the strange device, came out with a baby. Leto's like, yeah, I know it's Wee. And he's like, go get Wee. We got to get out of here. Make sure she's doing okay and whatever. They talk about Spice and the Spice melange some more. And then Mineo says, why he won't take the Spice to live longer. And he says the Spice is the curse of the Atreides, so he refuses it. And then also that Siona's going to receive a package, but don't worry, it's not Spice. Wee comes back. They discuss her helping the Bene Gesserit with the Ixian audit. And how she is his now. He then tells her about the Golden Path. The Golden Path is going to lead. At the end, there's going to be no Spice, and he stopped all interplanetary travel, so he's imprisoned everybody, which is the same conversation Siona had with Duncan earlier. So we're just reiterating the same thing, which it keeps doing this, which makes this book just like drag. No men in fighting positions. Those that do rebel, and he waits for men to rebel, and when he does, he grabs them up like Mineo and puts them in administrator roles. And then the Golden Path is preparing humanity for something dark in the future that they have to prepare for, or they're all going to get wiped out. He asks her to wed him again. She says yes, and then she heads out to help the Bene Gesserits, give them a bunch of information about the Ixians, so when they go do the audit for her, that they're going to do a good job. And then we go straight to the Bene Gesserits. They got the visit from Hui, lets them know that she's going to marry Leto, but don't tell anyone right now. They'll all find out soon enough. She gives I think her name is like Antioch, who's a Bene Gesserit, Mentat, Reverend Mother, all the information about her birth, about how she grew up, everything she already told to Leto, essentially, so that Antioch can be ready to go on the investigation. There's another attack. The Talaxu threatened Wee and Leto. He becomes enraged. He kills a whole bunch of them. Fish speakers come. They kill the rest, and it's like, all right, let's go. There's like fighting all over Own. And that Leto realizes at some point that it's Motley who's like getting the Talaxu to like do this with their like new like agreements or whatnot. Okay. Hui's not injured, so that's okay. So it's like, all right, it's time to get the fuck out of here. Talks more about the Golden Path, his histories, the real story. People are going to see the real story when they find his histories that are buried under here. He talks about losing himself eventually, and then he explains, and then he talks about how Siona was bred to lead, and that issues with leadership can lead to tyranny, so you need somebody very specific. But that Siona she can't be told that she's going to lead, she has to decide for herself. And at that point, Wee moves with him back to the royal court where she'll be protected. Mineo then, in the next chapter, is talking to Leto about the wedding. People are talking, they're very emotional, like his godhood's in question. Talks about Manoa and Siona and the wedding itself. Later calms him down finally, and he comments to himself how Mineo held many promises, but he's stuck in the past. He held a lot of promise, but he's kind of stuck in the past at the same time. That Siona's the best, like, because he bred her specifically to like kind of overcome all these other like issues that all these other people are having. And the problem with Mineo is that a problem a lot of people have is they don't focus on the present, future, and past at the same time. Duncan then storms in. He definitely wants to bang Wee. They argue about it. Leto is trying to get Duncan to like understand something. So he's not telling Duncan directly, but he keeps trying to like kind of lead him to that, to kind of like educate him. He keeps pestering, prodding him, teaching him. Duncan is upset about being alive, about the whole thing. Leto's pretty amused because he's never seen this before in a Duncan, and any of the other Duncans that have been around. They talk about the frontiers, how the frontiers have been found. The aristocrats stopped exploring. And that Leto is different because he wants new frontiers. Later on, Leto's returned back to the Citadel. He's mad at Duncan because he's been super flirty with Wee, even though he told him not to do it very specifically multiple times. He then talks to Mineo about getting a new Duncan, how it might be a year, and that this Duncan is treading very dangerous grounds. Minoa then brings up Genema, and how she was married to Leto, but that she had children with Ferrodin. Leto's like, he starts picking up a worm. He's very angry about this subject. So Minoa's like, oh, I gotta get out of here, bye. And he leaves. And once he leaves, there's thrashing and all this stuff. And he hears some of the discussions from the fish speaker guard about how like Leto really lost it with this like, someone's gonna have sex with my woman and it's not, I don't approve of it. Anyway, it's very emotional for Leto, which is unusual. Leto, and then he needs a break, so he goes for a little sandworm swim in like the last desert. And then he meets up with Siona. They talk about like a lot of random stuff. And at the end, he mentions that she's ready for the test. And at this point, we find out like, oh, I thought I was here for. I thought this was the test. And he's like, the fuck? No, let's do this. So then Duncan comes in and starts yelling at Mineo, who's just chilling in the dining hall eating. And Mineo runs into Duncan, who's in the dining hall, yells at him, tells him to stay away from Wee. Minoa storms off. Then Duncan goes to his room. He's pretty afraid for his life. He's like searching everything. Someone broke into his room. It's Wee. And so they have the sex, and then they talk about never doing it again. And like, how can you be with that monster? Blah blah blah. She's like, Leto needs me more than you do, and I'm happy to marry Leto. And I'm going to tell Mineo everything. I'm going to tell Duncan everything. I'm going to tell Leto everything about us having sex because he's not going to do anything because he loves me. And Leto has a lot of goodness in him, and that this golden path shit is like for realsy. Mineo is in a meeting with Leto about Duncan, and they're pretty sure he's going to die. Leto reveals that he wanted Wee to mate with Mineo, not Duncan Idaho. Oh well, Duncan is going to do Duncan stuff. His life's going to end soon, so whatever. So finally, Leto takes Siona out to the last desert for the test. We finally get the test. They get out to the middle of the desert to pass. All she has to do is survive and leave. She has no food and just like the still suit. And so she asks for help, and he says everything comes at a cost in the desert. At this point, the lad kind of like wrapping up the book at the end here, we flip back and forth between like this test and like Duncan Idaho doing crazy stuff. So he's storming around in the fish speaker quarter. He sees Mineo and he starts yelling Mineo. Mineo tells him to calm down and grow up. And Duncan is super mad about the fish speakers, and he's like, this is an abomination. And what's an abomination? The fish speakers are doing lesbo stuff. Yep, that's it. Welcome to the 1970s. He's real bad. Anyway, Duncan threatens Mineo and Leto. Mineo tells him, you better watch your fucking mouth. They argue some more about Siona, about Wee, about Leto, and then Duncan attacks Mineo, who beats the shit out of him with ease. And then Mineo mentions that if he wanted to kill him, he better do it stealthy in the back, because then he might have a chance. This old man beat the shit out of him. And Duncan's like on the floor, like, what the fuck? And Mineo's like, Leto's been breeding me, has been breeding us for thousands of years. You're an outdated model and you're old. So like, there's no way you could ever keep up. Head back over to one of the best parts of the book. We then head back over to Leto and Siona. They're traversing the desert. Siona's just not putting her face cover on, so she's losing a lot of water. Leto keeps thinking about it, and he's thinking of ways that he can try to like get her to figure it out herself. Because again, it's like if she can't survive, she can't survive. He needs to like wait and breed some more. She questions him about some things, and they get tired, and they go to Sleepypotamus. And then Leto's bemusing about like, well, she's probably dead. I got to start figuring it out. Like, back to the breeding pits. Back to Duncan, he's all satapotamus. He gets summoned by Mineo, and Hawaii's there. And Mineo apologizes for kicking his ass and embarrassing him because we asked him to do it. And then they have a little bit more argument, but Mineo keeps us calm. Hawaii joins in on Mineo's side. Duncan keeps acting like a child. And we finally agrees to stop seeing Duncan after he completely embarrasses himself. Duncan then leaves and heads back into his room. On the way, he runs into Nayla. He calls her a friend, and she's like, nah, bitch. He gives him a look. Back to the desert. Siona is literally dying. She finally is like, I need water. And she's like, if you give me water, I'll serve you. And he's like, that's not what I want. I don't want to. I'm not going to give you something for you to serve me. That's a guarantee, like stab in the back. And he's like, that's not the test. And he's like, you can drink my water, but it's mixed with spice. So that's the test because you're an Atreides. And she's like, fuck it, let's do this. So she does, and then she sleeps, and then she experiences everything. And we finally find out the golden path is the most obvious thing. Conclusion, it's Terminators, right? So in the future, thousands of years from now, there's going to be this intelligent machine threat that comes to like the universe, or the universes, as I like to refer to them sometimes, which doesn't make any sense. But they're gonna show up, and they're going to massacre all the humans. So if they were continuing on the path they had before, they would just be lazy and decadent and being able to cope. But because of like all the things Leto has been doing for the last 3,000 years to establish the golden path, if the humans continue on this path, then they will be able to defeat the killing machines and save humanity, maybe they'll continue to prosper for like ever or for a much longer time. And he mentions that this was already supposed to happen, that if it was not for him and his tyranny, and this is something she sees kind of as well, is that the things he did in the last 3,000 years stopped this from happening before, and that it is going to happen eventually. He can only hold it off for so long, but if he's trying to get the humans to like be in a position where they can like fight back. And then at this point, Leto, while she's like her trance, we go to Leto, and he's having a vision. He's like, Multi's going to attack me, and then many people are going to die, so he's like, we got to get back. And that Sione needs to pick up the pieces after Leto dies and carry on. And then it starts to rain, like real fucking rain, despite like all the weather controls in the desert to make it not rain. And then she's super relieved and like drinking the water, but he's in torturous pain because he's like a worm and water kills worms. And so she's watching him like writher around and be sad, and she's thinking about it. And that he is like, I am like the Bene Gesserits when they made Paul, and they realized they made Paul, and they're like, this is going to undo us all because they lost complete control, because he's lost control of her essentially. So or at least there is like a part of that he understands, right? Back over at the Citadel, Maneo's working on the wedding with his studies. Siona ended up surviving, getting through it all. Nayla is going to be the only one who's allowed to have a laser gun at the wedding, and then Duncan comes to see Maneo. They argue some more. Siona shows up. She taunts her father about everything that's going on. Maneo says they're both being sent away from the wedding because fuck them. And then Siona's like, "What, you just want me to breed with this guy?" And she's like, "I won't do it." And he's like, "Nayla's going with you." And then she's like, "Oh, I know about her and her tricks." They argue some more, and then Siona finally convinces Duncan, and they all head out to like not go to the wedding. Later on, Leto's chewing out Manua for sending Siona and Duncan away because that's part of the Golden Path, motherfucker. And the first thing he has done, this is like the first time you've ever done something without my consultation, and you fucked up. You're taking pieces off the board. I need this to happen. He thinks about Motley's future attack and all that stuff. You talk about how Wee was a born fish speaker. She was born with all these things beforehand, and that all these, the greatest fish speaker Wee has in like spades, and the fish speakers are like very jealous of this because he calls them his like wives, like God and the nuns and stuff, and that they're worried about her replacing them completely. And he tells Maneo to they're going to use the chains of water rings for the wedding. Originally they were going to use Ganimas, but now they're going to use Chani's, these water rings instead. And also that they're moving the wedding to where Duncan and Siona are instead of the original siege they were going to do it in. And so we head over to that siege. Duncan and Siona and Nella, plus an entourage, arrive at the destination. Duncan's completely disgusted by the museum Fremen, how they're not true Fremen, how he gets into it with their leader, and then he says, and the leader's like, well, maybe you can teach us to be real Fremen. Then Nella tells Siona and Duncan she has orders to put them in the same rooms. Siona again threatens Duncan, if you touch her, if you try to have sex with me, bruise me, I'll kill you. And then, they have a bunch of kids later on, so don't worry about it. And then they proceed. They don't have sex here. So some time goes by. Leto's people have captured Multi. They've stopped like whatever battle. Antioch went to the Ixian thing. She got killed up there. They lost a whole bunch of fish speakers with this attack, but they got him. So they bring him back. Maneo and him are talking about it. He shows up. They banter for a little bit. Maneo gets a little jealous because they seem like they're good friends because they're both like intellectually kind of up there. They talk about how Wee was made for multi-cells. They have this room, like a no room, which doesn't allow prescience. And that Talaxu also had the information from Ix about it, how to make these things. And that they, Wee was specially trained and designed specifically to lure Leto into like loving her and being a trap, essentially. So Maneo, when he hears this, he's like, I want to cancel the wedding. And Leto's like, nope, I already figured it out, so don't worry about it. We're going to finish this. And then at some point, Leto's like, I need this guy to die, but I can't order his death or be a part of it. And then Maneo's like, gotcha, homie. And so then Leto like goes to the corner of the room, and then Maneo just takes Multi and like throws him off like the balcony to his death. And then foreshadowing, Leto thinks about like, well, if I fell off this like the Citadel balcony, I'd probably be dead too. All right, so then Duncan and Siona are in their room. She's reading the histories of Leto and like talking about stuff, and they find out the wedding's being moved here. Then Duncan calls her a bad commander because she should have poisoned the wolves and that she got all her men killed. They get into like an angry fight about that. And then Duncan says that like we can get Nella to kill Leto with the las gun, and Siona's like, I don't know if the las gun's gonna do it, but Nayla will do it if Siona orders it because that's like what she's in. So maybe if they destroy the cart, that'll take care of him. Leto and Wee are having like their final send-off. They're preparing for the journey. They speak to each other. Wee understands Leto completely, his fears. She wants to be bonded in him with spirit, since they can't physically, and they speak about this. And then they start their little cruise to the sea edge, which is going to take like 3 or 4 days. At some point he starts crying, and she wipes away his tears. And he thinks about how it's been unknown centuries since anyone's touched him at all. Then we get to like this. There's a barrier wall outside of like the siege. Then the road's gonna come through here, and it's like impossible to climb. But then Duncan climbs it, and while he's climbing it, Nayla has an orgasm because she's so turned on by watching this guy like with so much determination and stuff. And it gets motherfucking Duncan, Idaho, I guess. And then Siona's like ready to follow after, and then what he's gonna do is gonna climb up that wall, drop a rope, and then they'll be able to get up there. And Nayla's just going to keep doing whatever Siona commanded her because Leto told her, and she's 100% faith in Leto because she does all things that God wills. And then while Duncan's climbing up, he remembers his childhood, climbing walls in the to hide from the Harkonnens, and he's finally able to make it up there. When Leto and Hui and company are almost there, Hui and Leto are doing a lot of flirting. They're having like a gay old time. At some point, Mineo is like super concerned and upset, but then Hui like calms him down. And then the plan is implemented in is this the final chapter? No, second to last chapter. Okay, the penultimate chapter. And it's successful. So the plan is that Nayla fires at the bridge. There's a bridge over some water, or like a cliff or something. Yeah, over some water. And Nayla shoots the bridge, and the whole entourage like collapses into this gorge and like dies. So the bridge is destroyed. Everyone falls down. Hui and Leto communicate one more time before she falls to her death, and she's like, I'll see you in the ever after. Mineo finally sees like golden smoke, which he attributes to like the golden path. He's like, I see it. This is how it's supposed to be. I realize now that everything had to be this way. And again, it's like it did. So for the humanity to be set up on the golden path, Leto had to die here by the hands of like Nayla, who it's at some point in the book is called like Judas by like a future, like, oh, in the future we call this woman Judas because of like her betrayal or whatever. And so he dies, and the Leto falls in the river, and the sand trout like all leave him so they can start terraforming Dune again because they go to water and because he landed in water. So then he washes up ashore, and he's all messed up, and Nayla's there, and he's like, you did the right thing. And then her and Duncan fight, and then Duncan kills her with the las gun, and he's about to like shoot Leto with the las gun, but then Siona like approaches. He then instructs them one more time. He talks about their descendants. Talks about Siona's in charge now, how they're going to mate. Duncan's like, I don't want to. I'm still mad that like Hui died in this whole thing. And Duncan's like, shut the fuck up. Or no, Leto's like, shut the fuck up. Duncan, you're going to be in charge of the fish speakers because they're not going to trust Siona because they're all going to blame her for the death of their god. And then he says, whatever you do, Siona, trust the Ixians and their machines. They need to continue forward. They need to continue advancing for humanity to survive. And let's see, it's something about they can't find Akarat or something. Siona mentions that whatever this Arakat thing is, it's written into histories, and she'll show Duncan later. And I don't think even in the future books they talk about this ever again. So again, it's just like there's no reason to read the books after this. Leto tells Duncan to take care of Siona, and then he passes. Siona mentions that she has had past selves as well, but they don't sense her, that she walks among them. She's like a new Atreides, that she exists. She has all this access to all this information from like the past selves and the ancestors, but that none of them can sense her, so that she stays unblemished, and there's no like abomination affect there, but she can still like draw someone upon their power. And that in that regard, she's exactly like Leto. And then the last chapter is just some old bullshit. It's like even further in the future, like who knows, thousands of years, that there's like tons of descendants of Siona and Duncan, and that they've taken people and like expanded out the empire, and now people like exist in like many universes, which doesn't make any sense because it's not talking about dimensions like we would fathom them. It's more like many solar systems. And that this lady who's like recalling all this, she wrote like a minority review of like the histories of Leto because there's like they want to like kind of lock it up and not give it to people, but she talks about how there's a possibility to bring Leto back to life, that the sandworms that exist now, that they hold the key to like Leto existing, and that they're back on Arrakis. And then they talk about how like they're not really using spice as much because now they have like actual spaceships with like real machines or whatever. And the more about like just Ixian machines generally, and how the Ixian machines are doing all the work, and they don't really need like the Spacing Guild or the Navigators or whatever, which is probably what's setting them up to, which is what's setting them up to be able to fight back the living machines. And that's the end of the book. And like I said, I'm done with this. I'm not reading any further. But if you couldn't tell by like my tone with a lot of this book was pretty boring. Like the issue is it's like Leto is too much of like an invincible god, and he kind of is in the previous book too, but at times you're like, even he's concerned that he's not going to make it through. But here it's like the golden path is set, it's just moving forward, and I feel like you could have just like expanded upon the third book a little more by having like a description of the golden path, and just been like, and at some future date like machines came and the human beings were able to overtake it because of the sacrifices of the Atreides family at the end. And I would have been like, that is a much better series. Like that trilogy would have been much more satisfactory than like this thing that keeps getting drawn out and getting like another Atreides like 1500 years in the future and more Duncan Golas and like all this kind of crazy bullshit that happens in like the future books. And even this one was kind of just like, I almost don't want to I wouldn't categorize this as being like part of like the regular Dune stories, because you get like 3 books in a row that are like back to back to back, and then it's like 3,000 years in the future, and already it's like close the book, move on with my day. And this one just really, it didn't really get into philosophy that much. It had some like base takes and stuff and like said some random stuff. But other than that, it was just kind of like drawn out mess. So it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, this is an easy pass. It's all right if you read it, if you want. It's not something where I'd be like, don't read it, but it's like, yeah, you're not missing too much if you don't read this. But yeah, there you go. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.